Listen closely as House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries and Tennessee State Representative Justin J. Pearson issue a stark warning. The latest legislative maps are not standard partisan maneuvering, but a dangerous assault on democratic representation that could redefine the American political landscape. The national conversation surrounding election integrity, voter suppression, and fair representation has reached an undeniable boiling point, ignited recently by a highly controversial judicial decision. In a fiery and deeply impassioned statement reacting to the Virginia Supreme Court's decision to effectively block the state's newly drawn and voter-approved congressional map, Democratic House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries did not mince his words. He emphasized with great frustration that over 3 million citizens in the state of Virginia had cast their votes in what was supposed to be a free and fair election, yet the state's Supreme Court deliberately chose to invalidate their collective voice. Jeffries argued forcefully that this specific judicial decision actively disenfranchises everyday voters and fundamentally violates their constitutional due process rights. Characterizing the sweeping move to overturn an entire election as an unprecedented and undemocratic action that simply cannot be allowed to stand, Jeffries pointed a direct finger at his political opponents. He accused MAGA Republicans of explicitly adopting voter suppression not just as a fringe idea, but as a core, deliberate political strategy. According to Jeffries, this alarming strategy is clearly evidenced by the actions of far-right extremists sitting on the Supreme Court who have been actively gutting the landmark Voting Rights Act. He warned that this systematic dismantling of voting protections opens a dangerous door to a Jim Crow-like attack on black representation, specifically targeting communities across the American South. Despite these massive structural and judicial challenges, Jeffries expressed strong, unwavering confidence in his party's path forward. He stated that Democrats are currently exploring all available options to overturn this shocking decision. He confidently proclaimed that no matter what it takes, House Democrats will win the upcoming November elections so that they can help rescue this nation from the extremism currently being unleashed by Donald Trump and the Republican Party. He assured his supporters that their fight is not over, rather, they are just getting started. Looking ahead to those highly anticipated November elections, historical trends and current political polling indicate a very strong possibility that the Democratic Party could successfully retake control of the House of Representatives. When questioned directly about whether the aggressive, seemingly out-of-control gerrymandering tactics employed by Republicans might compromise or destroy this possibility, Jeffries remained completely resolute in his optimism. He firmly stated that the Democrats are going to win back the House of Representatives in November. He pointed out a crucial mathematical reality. The Democratic Party is currently only 3 seats short of securing the majority. Drawing heavily on recent historical precedent to underscore his deep confidence, Jeffries recalled the political landscape of 2018. He reminded the public that when Democrats successfully took back the House in that midterm election cycle, they were initially 24 seats short of the majority. They ultimately crossed that formidable hurdle, historically overperformed at the ballot box, and managed to flip a staggering total of 40 seats that year. Because of this proven track record of overcoming deficits, Jeffries suggested that Republicans are currently operating in a state of sheer panic. The overarching Democratic strategy moving forward is incredibly focused. Jeffries explained that they are going to continue to make it abundantly clear to the American people that the Democratic Party is committed to lowering the cripplingly high cost of living. Furthermore, they aim to completely fix what they view as a broken, inaccessible healthcare system, and they are determined to clean up the pervasive corruption that they see sweeping across the country. Jeffries specifically called out corruption within the halls of Congress, within the Supreme Court, and within what he described as the most corrupt presidential administration in all of American history. To truly address these deep-rooted systemic issues, Jeffries outlined a massive, multifaceted legislative agenda. He stated that the country is going to desperately need nationwide judicial reform, sweeping nationwide electoral reform, and comprehensive nationwide campaign finance reform. Achieving these vital reforms, he noted, necessitates a step-by-step electoral victory. First taking back the House, then taking back the Senate, continuing to press forward relentlessly, and eventually securing the presidency once again in 2028. This core economic message, focusing intensely on the day-to-day cost of living and healthcare access, has been championed fiercely by an increasing number of progressive candidates who have been successfully winning their primary elections across the nation. While some political observers and critics have suggested that this progressive messaging sometimes feels disjointed or out of sync with establishment Democratic leadership, Jeffries pushed back hard on the idea of a fractured party vision. He stated that ever since January of 2025, in his very first remarks delivered to the new Congress, he made it absolutely clear that lowering the high cost of living would be the central, unifying focus of his leadership. He acknowledged the painful reality that America is currently far too expensive for hardworking people who play by the rules, yet find themselves barely surviving instead of thriving. He categorized this intense focus on affordability as a universally held belief among Democrats serving in the House, a belief that seamlessly spans the entire ideological spectrum from the progressive wing to the New Democrats, the Blue Dogs, and all political points situated in between. This unified, disciplined message on affordability has already yielded tangible, measurable electoral success. Jeffries proudly noted that Democrats have now won elections for 16 consecutive months. He highlighted key examples of this winning strategy in action, pointing to successful campaigns in diverse regions. He mentioned Governor Mickey Sherrill in New Jersey, who ran a successful campaign centered entirely on affordability. He also pointed to Zohran Mamdani in the New York City election and Abigail Spanberger in Virginia, all of whom ran and won by heavily emphasizing the exact same platform of economic affordability. When pressed on the complex dynamics of non-open seat primary challenges, where progressive candidates often argue that the establishment Democratic leadership has not moved fast enough or hard enough, Jeffries maintained a balanced stance. He stated that while the leadership will predictably continue to defend every single House incumbent, the ultimate decision always rests firmly in the hands of the voters. He reminded the public of the foundational nature of the House of Representatives, an institution that the framers specifically designed to be the closest to the American people. Because representatives have only 2-year employment contracts, they are legally and morally obligated to go back to the people every other year. Everyone, regardless of their ideological leanings, is going to have to make their case directly to the individuals they are privileged to represent. Jeffries indicated that whether the candidate is a progressive incumbent, a blue dog, or a new Democrat, he is going to support members of the House Democratic Caucus. Ultimately, he stressed, the entire caucus must come together to push back against the unprecedented attack currently being waged on American democracy. He warned of an unprecedented attack on free and fair elections and a specifically unprecedented attack on Black representation in the American South and all across the country, a crisis he attributes directly to recent decisions handed down by the Supreme Court. However, the democratic process itself is under severe and agonizing strain, particularly in the southern United States. In these regions, the daily lived experience of the end of Reconstruction and the brutal era of Jim Crow laws is not just ancient history. It remains a powerful, painful, and present memory for many citizens. Legal analysts and political commentators are describing the current redistricting landscape as a profound and existential crisis, with some explicitly comparing the severity of the situation to the dark days surrounding the end of Reconstruction. Following the Supreme Court's decision that essentially gutted the landmark Voting Rights Act of 1965, southern red states, specifically including Louisiana, Alabama, Tennessee, and Mississippi, are aggressively working to redraw their House congressional maps. Alabama recently became the latest, highly volatile flashpoint in this intense legal and political fight. On a tense Friday, Republicans in the state approved plans for entirely new primary elections, though these plans are currently pending a crucial court decision to determine if the newly drawn GOP House districts can actually be utilized in the upcoming November midterm elections. The political tension in Alabama was not contained to the courtroom. It boiled over into chaotic, physical scenes at the Alabama State House. During these proceedings, a protester was physically dragged from the packed House gallery by security officers, highlighting the intense emotional and political stakes of the redistricting process. Similar high-stakes, dramatic tensions erupted in the Tennessee state capitol. Protesters were forcibly removed from legislative hearings regarding proposed congressional maps that overwhelmingly, and some argue unfairly, favored the Republican Party. Despite these vocal, passionate protests, Republican lawmakers in Tennessee moved forward undeterred, successfully enacting a brand new map that completely abolishes the state's only majority black district. Governor Bill Lee promptly signed this deeply controversial new map into law on the very same day. This lightning-fast legislative action prompted a sharp, deeply emotional rebuke from State Representative Justin J. Pearson, who is currently a candidate for the congressional seat that Tennessee legislators just voted to split into pieces. Pearson boldly and directly confronted the Tennessee Republicans on the floor, accusing them of systematically eviscerating the only black majority congressional district in the state. He stated bluntly that this was happening specifically because the community is majority black. He argued forcefully that the Republican Party is actively seeking to steal elections and legislative seats because the president and the party have fundamentally refused to address the everyday pain, the suffering, and the deep struggling of ordinary Tennesseans. Pearson characterized the redistricting effort not as standard politics, but as a targeted, malicious attack designed to crack District 9 into fractured pieces for the sole purpose of establishing more political and racial dominance. He explicitly labeled this effort as a manifestation of white supremacy operating within the state of Tennessee. Speaking on the broader national impact of these maps, Pearson warned that this is a deliberate, calculated attempt to destroy and silence the black majority community of Memphis. He views it as one of the most significant and dangerous attempts to take away the black political voice in the United States Congress since the end of the Reconstruction era. He estimated that this movement is attempting to take hold of 12 to 20 congressional seats across the South, in addition to potentially capturing up to 200 seats across various state houses and state senates. Despite the vindictive, harmful, and dangerous nature of what happened in the Tennessee legislature, Pearson vowed that his community in District 9, right there in Memphis, is still fighting fiercely against this rising tide of racism, authoritarianism, and white supremacy. This aggressive redistricting strategy in the South is part of a much broader, deeply interconnected national conflict over the entire American electoral map. The battles over map redrawing have been playing out extensively throughout 2026. The process gained significant, unstoppable momentum after states like Texas kicked things into high gear earlier in the year. Other Republican-led states quickly followed in sequence, all of them attempting to fundamentally reshape congressional districts in ways that would lock in long-term GOP advantages. Their ultimate goal appears to be constructing an electoral map that is structurally inhospitable for Democrats, regardless of what the broader national political environment or popular vote might look like. The legal and legislative maneuvering often feels deeply interconnected, creating a strong perception among many voters that Republican legislators and conservative judges are working closely together as a unified bloc. This perceived coordination is designed to deliberately hinder Democrats and assist Republicans in maintaining systemic power. Former Senator Doug Jones of Alabama, who is currently running as a candidate for governor, reflected deeply on this troubling dynamic. He noted that historically, there were federal judges in Alabama and throughout the South who bravely stood up against the segregationists back in the 1960s. He cited courageous judicial figures like Frank Johnson, who defended civil rights when it was deeply unpopular to do so. However, Jones observed that the current judicial landscape feels vastly different and highly partisan. He stated that most folks within the Republican Party firmly believe that the courts across the South in particular are ideologically aligned with them. This is largely because these courts have been overwhelmingly populated by judges appointed by Donald Trump. Yet Jones offered a small glimmer of hope for judicial fairness. He pointed out a surprising development. When a 3-judge panel initially ruled on the controversial congressional maps in Alabama, 2 of those 3 judges were actually Trump appointees. Despite their political background, those judges wrote what Jones described as an incredible textbook opinion. He noted that their ruling heavily focused not just on the statutory requirements of the Voting Rights Act, but also on the foundational principles of equal protection under the 14th Amendment. Regardless of whether there is a coordinated master plan among Republicans, Jones insisted that Democrats are going to have to continue to fight relentlessly. And despite the sheer scale and intensity of the Republican gerrymandering efforts across the nation, Democrats have firmly maintained their position in the fight. They have not been pushed out of the arena. They are still very much positioned in a way where a massive electoral night remains genuinely possible. This specific reality appears to be making a significant number of Republicans privately nervous, a sentiment that drastically and noticeably contrasts with their highly confident public messaging. The clearest, most undeniable signal of this internal GOP anxiety is something that does not always make dramatic front-page headlines but carries enormous, undeniable analytical weight. A notable number of Republicans are choosing to step away from Congress entirely, retiring and deciding not to seek re-election. This trend matters far more than it might appear on the political surface. Historically, members of Congress do not typically walk away voluntarily. The entire history of congressional careers tells you everything you need to know about how politicians feel about the power and prestige of their seats. People routinely spend decades in those chambers. Senators and representatives dedicate their lives to building careers spanning 30 or 40 years. Therefore, voluntarily surrendering a seat is not the norm. It is a rare, glaring exception. When these seasoned politicians walk away, it almost always signals something highly specific and deeply revealing. Either the individual politician believes they are personally vulnerable in a challenging race that makes the grueling fight simply not worth having, or they believe their party is heading toward collective, devastating losses. They foresee losses serious enough that they absolutely do not want to endure the brutal, frustrating reality of being relegated to the legislative minority while simultaneously fighting through brutal, exhausting re-election campaigns. Instead of facing that grim scenario, these experienced politicians are choosing to step aside while they still can. They are smoothly transitioning into lucrative private sector positions, engaging in high-paying lobbying work, and securing consulting contracts. This well-worn revolving door of Washington typically opens most reliably when savvy, experienced politicians sense exactly which way the political wind is blowing long before the general public catches on to the shifting tide. The fact that these high-profile retirements are happening even after aggressively redrawing maps across multiple states carries real analytical weight. It strongly indicates that many Republicans still appear to believe a very rough, unforgiving election cycle could be coming their way. It tells political analysts that the gerrymandering alone may not offer sufficient protection against the immense wave of change they sense building within the electorate. Furthermore, political strategists are identifying another massive, hidden risk in the specific way Republicans are drawing maps, particularly in heavily populated states like Texas and Florida. It is a risk that could spectacularly backfire on them in ways their own strategists may be severely underestimating. In their aggressive, highly calculated attempt to flip Democratic-leaning districts, Republicans are taking their own reliable conservative voters and spreading them out into more competitive geographic areas. On paper, in a sterile war room, this offensive strategy looks like a brilliant expansion of the playing field. It creates a higher number of potentially winnable Republican seats, looking like a bold offensive strategy rather than a strategy of defensive consolidation. However, this tactic simultaneously does something highly dangerous to their own structural integrity. It drastically weakens the voter margins in districts that used to be safely, reliably, and comfortably red. Instead of holding a smaller, impregnable fortress of extremely safe Republican seats where the outcome of the election is never genuinely in doubt, the party ends up with a much larger number of seats that lean only lightly Republican. In these stretched, geographically manipulated districts, the voter cushion is paper thin, and the margin for error is extraordinarily narrow. Consequently, in a bad election year when national sentiment definitively turns against the party in power and enthusiasm gaps heavily favor the political opposition, those lightly Republican districts suddenly become highly dangerously vulnerable. They become exposed to exactly the kind of massive, unexpected upsets that can flip control of an entire legislative chamber in a single night. This precise scenario is what some Republicans appear to be quietly, nervously recognizing. They realize that this ambitious, overarching strategy could easily transform into what political analysts sometimes call a dummymander. A dummymander is a gerrymander specifically and greedily designed to maximize the total number of seats a party holds, but which ultimately ends up overextending the party geographically. By optimizing exclusively for the absolute best case scenario, this strategy leaves the party dramatically more exposed and vulnerable when public opinion unexpectedly swings against them. It is a stark reminder that the strategy was optimized for a perfect political environment, and the best case scenario may not actually be what the voters deliver when they finally head to the ballot box this coming November.